Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Christy. I am a first year PhD student studying English literature in London, and today I am sharing with you all a video of my November wrap up. So this month I read 8 books, which I'm quite pleased about, in a variety of formats from physical copies to ebooks to audiobooks. So I will try to keep this brief, but as always my videos tend to be quite long, so we will see how we go, but we're just gonna jump straight in. So the first book that I finished reading in the month of November is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I had heard incredible things about this book. Pretty much everybody that I know who has read it absolutely loved it. It is a Dracula reimagining, but specifically a kind of Carmilla retelling. So this deals with quite heavy subject matter, so just trigger warnings and content warnings, or maybe something to keep in mind if that's something that you're concerned about, specifically in the kind of realm of domestic violence. But the main character in this, Constanta, I believe, she essentially is taken in as Dracula's first bride, and it is her story of how their relationship develops and also accumulates more people that become involved, and her relationships with those other brides as well. This is beautifully written, and I know a lot of people have used the description of purple prose for this book. I would disagree that it's purple prose. I can understand why people are arguing that or think that, because in the context of more contemporary novels, I do think that this is very lyrically written, but I think that purple prose is something really lavish and luxurious in the way that the writing is done. And so when you think purple prose in a literary context, it is, you can think of Anne Radcliffe, right, as one of the greatest examples of purple prose, in my humble opinion. It's pages upon pages of descriptions of very minute details. You know, you could have 2 pages of description of a jewel, for example. So I don't think that this fits the criteria for purple prose per se, but I do think it is beautifully written, and it is technically a spicy book, and there are some scenes within that, but even though I'm not somebody who typically reads that, I didn't find that took away anything for me. The only thing I will say, and one of my friends actually warned me about this in a book club when she was talking about it, Kaylin, she said, if you're not really into the spicy aspects, maybe don't read the last chapter. It's like the epilogue. And I completely forgot about that until after I had finished the entire book. And I went, oh yeah, should have listened. I should have not read that final chapter. It's not even just because it's very spicy, but because I think it really took away the impact of the ending. Like, it just didn't need that last chapter at all, and it actually ended up resulting in me taking away a star from the book. Again, it's not just the spicy aspect, like that's fine, but it's the fact that the ending was so, I felt, powerful and strong, and then you have this just like random bit at the end that I think the author just wrote to give the audience what she thought that they wanted, if that makes sense. And clearly it does work for a lot of people, because a lot of people think really highly of this book, and I will definitely pick up more from this author because I did really enjoy it. I can't remember how many stars I gave it, but overall a really fun read, especially because I read it in the end of October. That's when I started it for like a Halloween read and finished it in early November. The second book that I finished in the month of November was Blue Sisters by Coco Malors. This is a literary fiction, I guess is a category it would fall into, and it is about 4 sisters, one of whom has unfortunately passed away from an overdose due to pain medication. She suffered from endometriosis, and that is kind of what this book is centered around, is these 3 sisters coming back into contact at the 1st year anniversary of their sister's passing. And when I first started this book, I was really loving it. The characters I found were starting to be quite well fleshed out, and the relationships between one another were really messy, but on purpose, and I really enjoyed that messiness. But in the second half of the book, I just felt like everything was really repetitive, and I was getting really annoyed with the majority of the sisters because there was no development, there was no real lessons learned, and it just continued being really messy, but not in any kind of meaningful way. I didn't care about the characters, which I think is the main thing that I had an issue with. Like, this clearly is a book that's meant to move you, and I just wasn't moved. Like, if characters are going through really awful, horrific things, I want to feel as though I am being destroyed. Like, that is what I want, and this just, I ended up giving it, I think, 2 stars because I just don't think that it's worth reading. Sorry. There were some beautiful quotes, especially as somebody who has endometriosis. I did find some quotes really beautiful and eloquent, and, you know, I was highlighting them. But other than that, I can't really get behind this book. So apologies if you loved it, but it just wasn't for me. Moving on, I read a non-fiction book. So I was trying to emphasize a lot of non-fiction in the month of November because it's non-fiction November, as I've done a previous video earlier this month about it. And one of those books that I have read is Feline Philosophy, Cats and the Meaning of Life by John Gray. It's a very teeny book, but this was beautiful. I absolutely adore this little nugget of a book. It was so insightful in terms of the philosophy itself. I did wish that the elements of like lives of cats and such were brought a bit more into it in kind of one area of the book, because I think that it dropped out and really focused more on like philosophy itself, but it did bring that back quite quickly. So that was the only kind of issue, not even issue, just kind of critique, I guess, of the text itself. So I gave it 4.5 stars. I just love this. It moved me, and it's all about kind of considering how we as humans get so wrapped up in our heads and our ideas and expectations of what we think we need to be doing in comparison to a creature like a cat who is existing in the moment. So it's not, their identity isn't so much evolved around what they do so much as actually just being, and what we can learn from cats in that regard. I just think that this is beautiful, and I would highly recommend it. And like I say, it's super short, so a perfect little introductory way to get into philosophy as well. If you're somebody who is new to the area, you definitely don't need a background in philosophy to approach this. This is certainly written for a general audience, so highly recommend. The next book that I read in the month of November was another non-fiction, and that is Mary Beard's Woman and Power, a Manifesto. I read this for my thesis. I read this a very long time ago, back when it was published in like 2017 or something like that, and I just figured it was good to return to it because I couldn't really remember anything that I had read. But honestly, there's nothing much in this, I have to say. There's a lot of comparison in this second, like she talks about, obviously Mary Beard is a classicist, and she talks about the narrative voice of women and the silencing and erasure of that in like going back to antiquity in the first section of this book, which I thought was really interesting, but I wanted more. And then the second half of the book was really looking at Hillary Clinton and how she was kind of brought into comparison of Medusa and such when she was running against Trump back in 2016. I really wanted more of that first half of the book, and it wasn't really saying anything new. So it's still quite good, I guess, if you're looking for an introduction into very kind of specific elements of that. But ultimately, I think that there's better books out there on those topics. But I would really love to have read more of the first half of the book. So maybe she has something out there that's already written that I can look into that explores that in further depth. But I guess it's a good little nugget, a good stocking stuffer, if you will. Then I read, well, I listened to an audiobook. I listened to Orbital, the book that won the, I want to say the Man Booker Prize, not 100% sure, by Samantha Harvey. And it is a sci-fi novel. It's about astronauts and cosmonauts who are in space and just their perspective of looking down on the world and their relationships with one another while in the space station, and kind of reflecting also on a team that is going further than them, who are going to the moon, and reflections on that, which I thought was really interesting. But honestly, the best part of this book is just the reflections on it takes us around the revolutions around the earth that happened, and like the temporal disruptions and confusions that occur in sort of seeing 16 sunsets and 16 sunrises and things like that. Also, I found one of the really poignant observations of the book was how during the day you could kind of look at the planet as though it was uninhabited, whereas at night all these lights come on, and that's when human civilization is really seen from that outworldly perspective. And I have to say, Harvey's writing was incredible. The amount of research that she must have done because it literally, it was so vivid, the descriptions in a context that you really shouldn't be able to imagine in such a vivid way, but she really brings that in. And I wouldn't have been surprised if it was like, oh yeah, Harvey has been to space herself, because that is the amount of like level of detail that she brought into it. And I just think it's a beautiful story of humanity and our relationship with the planet, and also very poignant in terms of bringing to the forefront the critical message of the time that we are in terms of how we need to actually reflect on that relationship more and do better, because climate change is the crisis of the time. And so yeah, I just thought, and it's so small as well, that again, it's something that even if somebody maybe isn't necessarily leaning towards picking up something like that naturally, it's so short that it's like a really good introduction as well. Not introduction maybe, but it's a really good way of getting into reading something science fiction, if that's something that maybe people haven't been reading previously. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. I know people have mixed opinions on it, but I thought it was absolutely incredible. I also think that listening to it really gave an element as well to the story, because it was having that verbal communication from another human in telling this story. And it's absolutely beautiful, and I highly recommend that one. Then I feel like I read something else. Maybe I read Orbital first and then Woman of Power. That might have been the case, because I remember getting into a bit of a reading slump. I'm pretty sure actually now when I think of it, I listened to Orbital first, then read Woman in Power, and then Woman in Power put me in a bit of a reading slump, and I didn't know what to pick up. So I ended up doing the thing that I always do when I hit a reading slump and nothing's really calling to me, or I start reading a book and I just can't get into it, which is not normally the fault of the book in that scenario. It's definitely because of the reading slump. So I picked up the next book in the series that I'm rereading of a series of unfortunate events. So this is number 6. It is the Iratsi Elevator. And yeah, this series I've been rereading throughout the year. And at the beginning, I was reading them quite back to back, sort of before bed, because I found that this was a really great way of continuing to read before bed, even if I'd been reading all day for research and things, and I didn't want to read anything kind of complex or something that I was needing to be super engaged with. This was something just light and fun. But one of the issues with reading these back to back is that they're very similar in structure, and so it can be a bit much, and that could potentially also put you in a reading slump. But I've taken a break from them for quite a long time, and I decided to pick up the next one once that reading slump hit, and that was exactly the right thing to do because I flew through this. These are so fun. This one is like, I'm now at the point in the series as well that I haven't reread these since I think the first time I read them. So it's always really interesting to see where the stories are going. I mean, it's obvious very early on what's going on, but yeah, they're just a lot of fun, and so I will continue to reread this series until I finish it. When I finish it, then I don't know what I'm gonna do, but thus far these have been really, really enjoyable, and I can't get enough of them. Then following that, I read another non-fiction which I'd been reading throughout the month, and this took me such a long time to finish. I think that's also why I needed to pick up something that was light, because I was still reading this during most of the day for research. And this is Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is a fantastic book, but I did not love it as much as I thought I would. I know so many people who adore this. I think there's a lot of really important information and stories that are being delivered through this book. However, I really enjoyed the first kind of half of the book. Well, not even half. I enjoyed the first third of the book and the last third of the book, and in the middle it really lost me and I almost DNF'd it. Not because it wasn't beautifully written, not because it wasn't information that is really important. It's just the book got a bit repetitive, and these are a lot of collections of essays, and honestly I don't think that the weaving of them, ironically enough, really worked. And I think that this could have been at least 2 separate books. But that being said, there were some wonderful essays in here that I absolutely adored. Again, I do think it is a really important book. I just wish it was maybe about 150 pages less. But again, if it had been broken up into maybe 2 separate books, that could have addressed some of the issues. But one of my favorite essays was regarding the, what was it? It was something about the Wendigo footprints. I thought was really interesting, and towards the end of the book as well there was a lot more annotations that I did, because I came across, like, I'm so glad I didn't DNF it, because I came across some really golden nuggets for my research as well that I could then go and look up. So I do think that it's a really fantastic book. But yeah, the main issue that I did have with this book in terms of its content rather than just like the repetitiveness is there so much elements of motherhood and mothering and fertility, and that is just I don't want to say it's essentialism, because I don't think it is in this context, but it was a little bit like being hit over the brick with like this mothering aspect. And I think that's just like a personal irk that I had with it, because I think that probably a lot of people love that. But I think that could have, like, it was really interesting to read, but I would have loved to read that in the context of like maybe one book about her journey in terms of mothering and how mothering is part of these this wisdom and knowledge and culture and tradition. But it just was a bit much for me, and I wanted a bit of degrees of separation from that. I think that's also just coming from, you know, the current time that we are in, and there's a lot more kind of very vocal and loud people at the moment saying that women's only goal in life is to reproduce and to have children. And I don't think that is the message that is being given here at all. I think it also comes a lot in terms of the fact that these are like matriarchal structures in terms of the cultures, and therefore that mothering and motherhood is going to have a significant role, right? So again, I'm kind of talking aloud here in terms of working out my own issues with the book, but I felt that was a bit much for me in the context of also the research that I'm doing, but also very important, and I don't think incorrect either, because like I research ecofeminism, and a lot of that is wrapped up with women in nature and the fertility aspects and how that ties into agricultural control and such. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack in this book essentially, and I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was a 5-star read, unfortunately, even taking away my own personal subjective views on these contexts. I would say that it's still not a 5-star read, unfortunately, just because it was so long. But I do think that if you're interested in nature and if you're interested in learning more about our relationships with nature in a more intimate way and how we can learn from that which is around us, specifically plants, this is a great book. And then finally, the last book I read in the month of November, which I'm technically still finishing, and when I'm filming this, it is December 1st, so I'm cheating a little bit, I suppose. But I am currently listening to the audiobook by Miranda Hart, which is entitled I Haven't Been Entirely Honest With You. And it is another nonfiction. That's why I wanted to get to it this month. I have about 3 hours left of it to listen to, so I will finish it today. But essentially this is about Hart's journey with her chronic illness struggle. She was diagnosed with Lyme disease, and she's talking about the really severe extreme chronic fatigue and various other autoimmune symptoms that she had that had her bedridden for or homebound for quite a substantial amount of time. And this is over a trajectory of decades that she's speaking to, and her own research into how she could sort of rewire her brain in order to help relieve some of the stressors and triggers that were further harming the inflammation and such that was in her body. So I've been really enjoying it. People have mixed reviews about this as well, because there is this element of kind of changing your thinking pattern and positive thinking. But I think people who think that Hart is saying, you know, if you just think positively, everything will be okay. That's not what she's getting at, and she does stipulate that often within the text. But I can see why some people are taking that away, but I think that's an incorrect assumption to make on the book. However, I do think that it's a really poignant example of the fact that we do know scientifically that our thoughts have a huge impact on how we feel, and can trauma and other various forms of stressors can really alter the body in ways that make it more feasible for these conditions to develop. That's why a lot of the time a lot of autoimmune disorders do tend to affect women in particular. And I am somebody who has chronic illness, chronic pain, and a variety of health issues throughout my life. So I do feel like I can relate to this book in a different form, because everybody's journey with chronic illness is going to be nuanced to them. But I have really enjoyed listening to it. Also, Miranda Hart is just hilarious, and listening to this book I think is the way to go, because she's the one narrating it. I don't think I would perhaps enjoy it as much if I was reading it. It would be great to be able to annotate some stuff, but I don't think that her humor would come across as well for me, because I'm really bad at reading funny books. Like, it just doesn't feel the same as if you're listening to it. So it is very funny though, listening to. So I do recommend that one, whether you're just a Miranda Hart fan or you're somebody who's interested in somebody's perspective with dealing with chronic illness and how they have helped themselves in recovery towards being able to have a better quality of life. Then I would also definitely recommend that one for you. So that is all the books that I have read in the month of November. Now I'm going to jump into just showing you a few books that I picked up at the beginning of the month. I haven't purchased a whole lot of books this month because we are getting closer to the festive period, but I did get 4. But 3 of those are associated with book events that I went to, and all these books were purchased within like 2 days because it was those book events. So without further ado, let's get into those. So the first one that I picked up this month is We Are All Ghosts in the Forest by Lorraine Wilson. This is a post-apocalyptic dystopian cli-fi novel in which the internet has collapsed and there are digital ghosts that are bleeding out into the landscapes. The main character is around 40 or so years old. Her name is Katerina, and she's fled to the safety of her grandmother's village because these digital ghosts are hungry, and in overrun cities there are more of them. So she goes back to her grandmother's village at the edge of this forest, and that is where a wordless boy finds her. And this is also kind of a story of mothering in different ways that are unconventional. So again, Katerina does not have any children before the wordless boy or nonverbal boy arrives to her, and she ultimately, despite not wanting to have to deal with kind of looking after somebody, she ends up taking that on. There's also a digital cat ghost called, I think, Oliver in this, which I'm really excited about, and it's like it changes between all these other cats because there's so many cat videos and memes, etc. on the internet, and it's kind of all these like digital memory ghosts of those cats into this one cat, so that seems really fun as well. But from what I understand in terms of the event that I attended, the author herself is a conservationist, I think maybe a biologist, a conservation scientist, and I know that is going to play a role in this. Like, I specifically asked the question in terms of whether or not this addresses climate change and climate crisis, and she said absolutely, like it is 100%. So yes, I think that this is going to be a very important read, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. Another thing about this book and the author and the event that I was attending, because it was a dual event with 2 authors and 2 books, that both of the authors actually have PhDs, so it was really fun when I got to get these books signed that I was talking about, because both of them might have a place in my thesis. And so it was really interesting just talking with them as well. It was such a lovely event. Then the next book that I got that was also at that event, so it was the other author who was partaking there, is The Bone Diver by Angie Spoto. Her debut novel, The Grief Nurse, came out a few years ago, and this is essentially a reimagining of a traditional Selkie tale from Scotland. And I'm really interested in this. I don't really know much about it other than that kind of retelling aspect, but it is the main character we're following is the daughter of the only daughter in a family of Scottish sea killers or sea hunters, but she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to be a seal hunter or a seal killer, and therefore she ends up finding different ways to survive, specifically by becoming a bone diver. So she's diving for bones at this like mysterious manor house that sits on the cliffs in her community. But yeah, it says a gothic tale of family, the legend of the Selkies, shape-shifting mythological creatures, and a young woman who is offered an impossible choice. And I absolutely love this. It looks beautiful. The only thing is, like, it's huge. It's such a huge hardback. No hardback needs to be this big. Like, who's carrying this around with them? Comparing the size, like, is that not insane? I don't know. This, I think, is a great hardback size. This is just like, what is this? This is bigger than a clutch. Anyways, I have very strong opinions about the size of hardbacks. But yeah, I am excited to dive into this one, if you will. But I don't know how quickly I will get to it, because it does kind of feel more maybe like a spring summer read, but we shall see. We shall see. And like I said, both of the authors were just so fantastic and so lovely. I left that event just feeling so good. I think that I have been really lucky with book events this year, like the one that I went to with Cornelia Funke, and then this one with Lorraine Wilson and Angie Spoto. Like, they're just wonderful human beings and so kind to the audience as well who were there. And so yeah, I had a really, really good time. And then following that, so when I was at the book shop for that event, I came across a book table, because this was at Waterstones. It was down in Edinburgh, so I travelled down for it, and I saw a copy of A Little Life by Hanya. And I've seen this book everywhere. Everybody talks about it. Everybody is emotionally distraught apparently while they're reading it. And as I mentioned with the Blue Sisters by Coco Malors, like, I want to be distraught when I'm reading about horrific things, right? So this book has just wormed its way into my head and I could not stop thinking about it. I still can't stop thinking about it, and I've not even read it. I just was like, I need to know what this book is about. And I have put off reading it for so long because I wasn't sure if I could handle it, and I'm still not sure. I give myself the right to be like, nope, if I start reading it and realize that it's just not something that I can do, that's fine. But I saw this book and I was gonna get it, and then I thought, no, I'm already buying 2 hardbacks. Like, those are expensive, and those ones I want because, you know, like, I wanted to get them signed as well, and I knew that they could be potentially something for research. So even though I brought a copy of A Little Life up to the counter, I decided in the end not to purchase it, and I was going to look at some charity shops because I was in Edinburgh. They've got lots of charity shops, but I was kind of limited in the locality that I was in, and also because I had a train to catch. So this was the next day because that book event was quite late in the evening, so nothing was open after that. But yeah, so the next day, kind of before I had to catch my train, I decided to look at 2 charity shops. I was going to go to 3, but the first one was just furniture, which I didn't realize. I went in and I was like, oh, this is just all furniture things, so I immediately left. And then the first charity shop that I went to that did have some books, there was no copies there, so I was a bit bummed about that. But then I went to one more that I could see in the distance when I had gone into that first one, and so I thought, you know what, I'll just go give it a look because it's just around the corner. And went in there, a very small book selection, but they in fact had a copy. And not only did they have a copy, but it was only 50p. So I got a copy of A Little Life. This is also my preferred cover. I don't like the newer covers at all. I just don't like it when there's like people, like faces on covers. I really just don't like it. So I'm glad that it's one of these editions as well. Like I say, it was only 50p, so I have told myself that if I start reading it and I really just can't stomach it for whatever reason, then I will just put it away and I will gift it on to somebody else or put it in a charity shop. But I am excited to have a copy of this. I did also consider borrowing it from the library, but because it's a big book, I don't like borrowing big books from libraries, just because, especially if they're more popular, I know I'm not going to finish this really quickly, unless maybe it's like gonna really suck me in and I'm gonna have to just like read it constantly. But most of the time I'm a slow reader and big books are big books, so it takes me a while. So I'm just really glad to have my own copy of this. I don't really know what this is about, to be honest, other than 4 friends, I think, and their journey through life. And it's supposed to be devastating, and there's lots of trigger warnings, so keep that in mind going into it. But it doesn't really even have a synopsis here. Oh no, here we go. 4 classmates from a small Massachusetts college moved to New York to make their way. They're broke, adrift, and buoyed only by their friendship and ambition. There is kind, handsome William, an aspiring actor, JB, a quick-witted, sometimes cruel painter pursuing fame in the art world, Malcolm, a frustrated architect at a prominent firm, and withdrawn, brilliant, enigmatic Jude, who serves as their center of gravity. And I think that this follows mostly the perspective of Jude from what I have like seen people talk about it, but I really don't know. And yeah, it's just about their relationships and fallouts and all that kind of stuff throughout life. It says over the decades their relationships deepen and darken, tinged by addiction, success, and pride. Yet their greatest challenge each comes to realize is Jude himself. By midlife, a terrifyingly talented lawyer, yet an increasingly broken man, his mind and body scarred by an unspeakable childhood and haunted by a degree of trauma that he fears he will not only be unable to overcome, but that will define his life forever. Yeah, I don't know. I know that people have very mixed opinions about this book, about this author. Again, why I really wanted to find it secondhand. but we will see. It will be a journey, and again, I'm not entirely sure if I will actually be able to read this, but I won't know until I try. And then the final book that I got this month in November was another book event related one. So I went immediately after being in Edinburgh. The train that I was getting the next day after going to those charity shops was to go to Glasgow because I was going to a book event at a Waterstones there. And that was for none other than Jeff Vandermeer for the Southern Reach series. And that event was for the latest addition to the series, which is Absolution. And I'm so excited about this because I absolutely adore, I'm obsessed with the Southern Reach trilogy when it was a trilogy, especially Annihilation. I've read Annihilation so many times, and every single time I feel like I'm getting more and more from it. I will say that this book event was a little bit of a letdown. I just think that the host of it wasn't really well prepared, and there was a lot of like awkward trying to like formulate questions, and Vandermeer seemed really tired, which understandable. It was really quite late at night, but it definitely was a switch more to what I'm used to in terms of book events, like with interactions from authors versus, you know, the ones that I mentioned with Cornelia from K, and then also the one that I had been to the night before this. So that was a bit of a letdown, but it was still enjoyable. I am a bit weary going into this book now, though, based off of the conversations at the event. Not because I think that anything's going to be triggering or anything like that. I'm concerned about the crudeness of the book, which is not actually a problem, but for example, and I don't think that this is a spoiler in any kind of context, but if you're worried about spoilers, just skip ahead to the end. Like, this is the last book I'm talking about, so you can go. It's fine. But I really don't think this is a spoiler because they did talk about it in the event. But one of the things Vandermeer mentioned was how with the Southern Reach series, he would be invited to go to lectures and things like that, and a lot of the students would talk to him about symbolism within the text because they'd have papers that they had written or whatever, and a lot of the times he said the middle-aged white male professors were like the lighthouse in Annihilation, and the Southern Reach trilogy is a symbol, like a phallic symbol, and he was like, absolutely not. And these students got really upset because they had already done these papers and they had been, you know, marked and commented and given feedback about this symbolism that they were missing, because it wasn't. But then he said, oh, well, in this book I just figured I'd give them what they wanted, so I made a very like obvious scene of it being a phallic symbol. And I'm like, why? I hate when authors do that. Anyways, I haven't read this, so I don't know that is going to be an issue. But yeah, I'm nervous about this one because I love the first three so much, and I really hope that this does this justice as well. But yeah, I'm more nervous now than I was before the event. So we'll see how this goes when I eventually get to it. But that comes to the end of the video. Thank you all so much for sticking around and listening to me chat away about these books. I will probably try to do one for the month of December as well, but we'll see. I definitely will have a yearly wrap-up coming at the very beginning of January, which will be very exciting. But besides that, just again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!